Hello everyone, I'm Nasser, and today I'm going to give you 6 tips to writing a quality dissertation. But before we begin, just remember to hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too. So, before we start, let's define dissertation. Now, dissertation can mean different things. For example, here in the UK, if you are submitting a dissertation, usually that's for the award of a master's degree. And if you are a PhD student, you are producing a thesis. And in different parts of the world, it's the other way around. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to stick with dissertation. Thesis and dissertation, they can be used interchangeably. But honestly, the approach to both types of assignments is the same. But it's not really been clearly defined. But anyway, tip number 1. So you really want to know the rules before you start writing your dissertation, whether you're doing a master's or a PhD. So it's really important to speak to your supervisor, your colleagues, speak to university, really find out what are the rules on page formatting, so know where to put the margins, where to set them, your word limit. So for example, if you're doing a PhD dissertation, usually, depending on your discipline, it's 50,000 words. Also rules on plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is a big deal in academia. Avoid at all costs. Plagiarism is essentially taking someone else's work and passing it off as your own. Proofreading and editing. So you want there to be as little to no mistakes in your dissertation. So you want it to read immaculately, so there won't be any spelling, grammar, punctuation mistakes. You want it to flow. You want to basically convey your message in as clear and concise manner as possible to the reader. One thing I will suggest is getting your hands on past dissertations and use those as a blueprint to produce your own, because I'm assuming this will be the first time you ever have to write a dissertation. So getting your hands on some old dissertations, probably some that have been submitted within the last few years, will give you a good understanding as what are the requirements to producing your own. The next tip, time management. So you want to know how much time it will take you to produce your final draft. So only you will know the answer to this. Take, for example, 50,000 words as your target word limit, and you type at a speed at 40 words per minute. So it should take you around 21 hours to produce your final draft, right? Wrong. You also have to factor in things like research time, reading time, analysing data, proofreading, editing. There's all these sort of things you need to consider. After all, you're not a machine, so you're going to have to stop for breaks. So it can actually take you weeks, if not months, to come up with a final draft. And don't forget, your supervisor will have to read through it and give it the green light too. So there'll be several versions of your dissertation that you will end up with at the end. And it all just comes down to your writing skills and your proficiency in the English language. Of course, if you're a non-native English speaker, I highly recommend practicing and improving your English. So I've known students that have come from abroad and English is not their first language. I always recommend to them to speak and have conversation with the locals, watch English television, read English books, and with time, your English will improve. It just will, and it will be just in time for you to write your dissertation. And I've personally witnessed students that have started their PhD research with very poor English, to be quite frank, and by the end their English is amazing, and I'm just so proud at how much progress they've made. So it's really worth investing in time into improving your language skills. And if you don't have a deadline, so for example, some PhD students, they might have a funding cut-off date after which they have no more money coming through, but there is no strict deadline imposed on them. Impose a deadline on yourself and work towards it. Create your own. You don't want to be a PhD student for any longer than you need to be, because after all, you've got a life to live. So work to a deadline, set it. The next tip, proofreading and editing. So once you produce your PhD dissertation or master dissertation, you want to make sure that the language is immaculate. Proofreading and editing a dissertation of your own is insanely difficult. It's difficult to see the forest through the trees. I tried doing that myself many years ago, and I look back at my PhD dissertation and I find some errors, and it bothers me. So proofreading and editing your own work with an objective lens is just very difficult. You could ask a friend to do it for you, but that would be a massive favour. And it could be worth paying a professional to do it. Proofreading and editing really comes down to experience and language skills. So it's a very difficult thing to do, especially when you've got a large body of work ahead of you. The next tip, build your reference library. Now, for smaller assignments like lab reports or just your general coursework assignments for modules, now you probably only have like half a page to a page of references. For a 50,000 word dissertation, you may have hundreds of references, and to input those references manually will take an eternity. So I highly recommend using a reference management system, so something like EndNote or Mendeley. I personally use EndNote, it's fantastic. So for example, you could input all your references into EndNote, and that will automatically insert them into your document right at the end. And whenever you delete references in the text or you move sentences or paragraphs, it will automatically update the reference list at the end. So it will save you so much time and headache. I also recommend Google Scholar. It's fantastic. It's a great tool that I use during my time in academia. So I highly recommend checking out my blog, which talks a little bit about how to use Google Scholar. I'll leave a link to that in the description. The next tip is the structure of your dissertation. Now, I'm sure you probably will be familiar with how a dissertation is structured, but just to go over it very briefly. So the title is the first thing readers are going to see. It has to be something compelling. You don't want it to be something bland and uncaptivating, like PAA supports the dense metallic membranes to separate hydrogen from a hot gas mixture. You could instead use something like the effects of porous ceramic supports on the performance of dense metallic membranes for hydrogen separation applications. I mean, when in doubt, just look at the titles of other dissertations to get some inspiration. Next is your abstract. So that's anywhere between 200 to 300 words in length. It's basically a synopsis, a summary of all the key findings of your research. And that's one of the most read sections in your dissertation. So you want people to read that and then read on. So it's like the equivalent of the description given on the back of a DVD. It gives a description of the movie to convince people to watch the entire film. So similarly, you want your abstract to really highlight the key elements, the important aspects, key findings of your work. Next is acknowledgement. So this is where you mention all the people involved in your research that made it possible. So your supervisors, your colleagues, your family members, your loved ones, and the funding body. Then you have your introduction. This is where you tell your story. You tell the reader why you're doing why are you doing all this research? Why have you dedicated all these years of your life to performing this research? So this is where you really set the research question, or you propose a solution to a problem that already exists, that hasn't been solved before. Then you move on to the literature review. Now, essentially, you want to survey the works of other peers in your field and critique them and juxtapose your ideas against them. Now, my literature review took up about 40% of my PhD dissertation. Now, I'm not saying that yours should take up about as much space as mine did, but just to give you an idea of how much reading you're probably going to need to do. It's quite a lot, but you've got years to do it. So that should give you enough time to really filter through and really shortlist the most important articles and publications relevant to your research. Next is the methods section. This is how you describe what you did during your research. So what you did, so what equipment you used, the make and model of those equipments, the samples, everything, so that someone else can go away and pretty much replicate your methodology it's part of the scientific method so that people can go away and prove or disprove your findings. So you have to be very detailed in this part, sort of like a cake recipe. So you have a list of ingredients and a step-by-step guide as to how to then go about baking a cake. Then you've got your results. So what did you find as a result of your methodology? So you can present that in the form of graphs, charts, tables and whatnot. Then you discuss your findings in the discussion section. So you really take the hand of the readers and explain to them and interpret and really show them what your results actually mean, why they are so significant. Then you have the conclusion section. So this is where you get to come up with an answer to the proposed research question that you made in the introduction section, or maybe you have found a solution to that problem that you introduced previously. Now, and if you didn't, or if you're unable to find a solution or answer, then perhaps come up with a reason as to why. So you put forth your arguments and you use your results to back up those arguments. Then you've got future work. So what to do next? So this is really a sort of a list of ideas for any other researchers out there to, if they wish, pick up where you left off to continue your work and progress it to the next stage. And it might be something you've already attempted and it just didn't make the final cut in your PhD dissertation, but it's always good to sort of give suggestions where the research needs to go next, or where it could go next. Then you've got the appendix section, so that contains supplementary secondary material. So that's really results and data that you felt wasn't quite important enough to include in the results section. You stick that in the appendix section. Then finally you've got the references section, and that's where you have your list of references, your bibliography, and they all have to be in the correct format, the correct style. This is really crucial. Consistency is king. I've seen a lot of coursework and other assignments where there's been a lot of inconsistencies in the reference list. You have to be consistent here. So really familiarize yourself with the different referencing styles, so Harvard, Vancouver, and so on, and stick to them. Don't mix between the two. Pick one and stick to it throughout your entire dissertation. The next one is plagiarism. Now, as I mentioned previously, this is the act of using someone else's work and passing it off as your own. It's basically intellectual theft. It's a crime in academia almost, and people have been kicked off courses because of it. So really avoid copy and pasting. It's just not worth it. You will get caught. And there are sophisticated plagiarism software that are used to scan dissertations in order to detect any plagiarism whatsoever. So for example, my PhD dissertation was put through a software called Turnitin, and Turnitin would scan my document and it would come up with a score, and if you score above a certain number, then it's flagged for plagiarism, and then you're in trouble. So really make sure you don't copy and paste, and make sure you give credit and you cite and mention other people where you're supposed to mention them, and don't try and pass it off as your own work. So what do you think? So remember to check out my Writing a Quality Dissertation blog on my website. Leave a link to that in the description. Do you think I've missed something? Do you need help with proofreading or editing your work? I'd love to hear from you. So leave anything in the comment section below, and remember to hit that subscribe button and to like.